I noticed the timestamp before the tone 7:55 a.m. No subject, just ASAP. HR never used that kind of language. It read like a child pretending to write something urgent. I closed my laptop, left my half-finished toast on the counter, and walked into the building like I had for 15 years. Steady, early, professional. The receptionist avoided eye contact. That was the second flag. When I stepped into the HR suite, she was already there, legs crossed in my chair, fingers tapping the armrest like she'd owned the place for decades. Celia Langford, fresh title, new hair badge, still shiny like a name tag at a networking event. The CEO's daughter. I'd seen her around mostly during company mixers she barely stayed for. She didn't rise. We're streamlining, she said, smiling like it was an apology. Legacy roles have to make room for strategic evolution. Her words weren't hers. I could smell the LinkedIn jargon baked into every syllable. She gestured to a bland folder with my name on it. The HR rep sat stiff in the corner, eyes on her notepad. No introduction, no warmth. Celia slid the folder forward. Your role has been deemed redundant. Effective immediately. She really believed she'd done something brave, revolutionary. I looked at her then at the folder. I didn't open it. I didn't ask for clarification. I didn't protest. Instead, I set my badge on the table next to the stylized "Thank you for your service" letterhead. Then I reached for the laptop, my issued one, and slid it across the polished wood like a chess piece no longer needed. No exit interview, I asked softly. HR blinked. Celia tilted her head. I stood, smoothed my blazer, and just before I turned away, I said it quiet enough to be mine alone. Legacy doesn't expire when you forget who built it. I walked out through the same glass doors I'd opened every morning for over a decade, my spine straight, my hands empty. The elevator ride down felt colder than usual, but not sharp, just clean, necessary. Back home, I placed the box on the table and reached for the drawer only I ever opened. The box rattled gently as I set it on the kitchen table, dog photo face down. The glass cracked just slightly in one corner. My mother's quote slipped out from behind it. Don't get even. Get everything. I smoothed the paper flat with the heel of my hand and didn't look away from it until the kettle clicked off. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't replay her voice or mine. Instead, I walked to the hallway cabinet, the one no guest ever saw, and unlocked the panel behind the coats. Inside a fireproof box. The combination hadn't changed in 15 years. I didn't even need to think as my fingers dialed it in. The lid gave way with a hiss. Not dramatic, just final. Inside were the things I'd kept out of reach for this exact possibility. My early system architecture notes, a backup drive, 2 notarized evaluations from a VP who once told me I was the operational brainstem, and the contract. Thick printed, signed in blue ink by Harold Langford himself back when the company nearly folded under a warehouse fire and a failed migration. Clause 17E, just 3 paragraphs. I'd written most of it myself. Veto authority on structural terminations if my proprietary systems remained in use. Royalty rights, non-disrupt clauses tied to executive turnover. It had been a negotiation, not a gift. I wasn't given those rights. I earned them with code, bloodshot eyes, and 2 years of weekends no one remembered. I opened my personal laptop and pulled up our current internal dashboards, public ones, the client-facing layers. The framework was still there, renamed, recolored, but still running on the architecture I designed during a snowstorm when no one else could get the shipments out. I reached into the box again and found the smaller flash drive, the one I'd taped under my old desk with surgical tape. On the label, I'd written only 2 words, trigger only. I plugged it in. The files loaded, slowly contract scan, embedded version, history, metadata trails, all time-stamped, all mine. I opened a blank email to the board of directors. No CCs, no emojis, no fluff. Just a subject line, clause 17E, notice of violation. They'd called it CL Flow. Same skeleton, new skin. The dashboards looked slicker shadows and gradients, the kind of design flourishes that meant more to investors than engineers. But I knew the bones. I could still feel the pulse beneath the gloss. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have planned, was Ephraim. I'd seen him once, maybe twice in passing. Quiet kid. Glasses too big, hoodies too long, always scribbling in the margins of things. He'd been buried in DevOps since the last restructure, just another junior trying not to make noise. But someone had tasked him with reviewing code dependencies ahead of their new warehouse rollout. And somewhere, 3 hours into a blur of script audits and data flowcharts, he found it. A tag, not visible to the UI, not flashy. Just a single line buried inside an asynchronous load balancer. CM Veil. Ops Logic v3.7. Do not modify without license. He paused, blinked, checked the dev logs, found another tag, then another, not just one or two, dozens, all nested deep, none of them removed in the rebrand. He didn't say anything, just took a screenshot, then zipped the log snapshots into a folder, named it Royalty, Exposure Review, now.zip, and uploaded it through the anonymous HR inquiry channel. It reached 2 inboxes before lunch, 4 more before the end of the day. By then, someone had already recognized the signature. They pulled my last commit notes from the legacy archive. They matched. Meanwhile, I sat in my dining room with a second cup of chamomile and watched the read receipt stack. Janice Marraro opened the email. So did Marta from compliance. One opened the attachment 3 times. I didn't follow up, didn't poke, didn't explain. Ephraim's manager found the folder late that afternoon. A sticky note sat on top, written in shaky pen. Think we owe someone royalties. By the next morning, legal was drafting internal inquiries. The freight dashboard started flickering, nothing serious. Just a loading delay here, a rewrote warning there. I knew those symptoms. I built them to warn before things broke. And I knew who would feel the cracks first. I've never been one for digital noise. No cryptic status updates, no half-baked LinkedIn manifestos. Not even a photo of the view outside my kitchen window, though it's clean and wide and filled with trees I planted myself. Instead, I opened my email at 5:59 a.m., typed only what was necessary, and attached 3 files, the scanned contract with Harold's signature, a legal summary of Clause 17E, and a code diff sheet showing my original IP thread still embedded in their live system. Subject line breach of Clause 17E, IP and structural oversight. To the board of Langford Freight Holdings. No CCs, no BCCs. Celia was not on the list. I ended with one sentence: I trust this is an administrative oversight. Please advise on corrective action before royalty delinquency becomes a formal claim. I didn't press send right away. I let the moment sit silent and taut like the second before a domino tips. Then I clicked. By 6:07, the first red receipt pinged back. Janice Marraro, then Marta Dway, the compliance lead. Then Alton Ng, the quiet CFO who never spoke more than necessary but always read everything twice. I didn't need to follow up. Somewhere across the city, Janice stirred her coffee, already reading the clause aloud under her breath. I knew her habits: early riser, no cream, 1 sugar. She'd be halfway through the contract by the time Celia even checked her phone. I sat back and let the code speak. Let the contract breathe. Let the boardrooms whisper. There is a power in not scrambling, in not chasing. I learned that in the early years when I'd built freight logic on borrowed time and worn-out machines, knowing no one was coming to save me, you learn to be still. You learn to trust the work. By noon, 3 different department heads had opened the documents. Legal forwarded my attachments to internal counsel. Janice didn't reply, but I didn't expect her to. She didn't believe in email drama. She believed in leverage. And by 3:00 p.m., the first delay ticket hit Celia's dashboard. Minor. Trivial. But it came with my watermark at the bottom. It started with a small routing hiccup: Seattle's order flagged as delivered to San Antonio. At first they blamed the vendor, then the interface, then someone half-joked about Mercury being in retrograde. But the calls kept coming. One client couldn't access order history. Another flagged a discrepancy between warehouse inventory and real-time tracking. A third called 3 times in 1 hour, escalating from firm to furious to get your CTO on the phone now. Inside the Slack channels, I no longer had access to someone dropped a message in the logistics thread. Wait, wasn't Marin the one who patched this system during the 2020 freeze? No one answered right away. But the silence filled in the gaps. By the time the 4th ticket came in, a delay from East Hub that rerouted perishables into a dry freight lane, legal had already begun reviewing the clause I'd sent. Not with curiosity, with alarm. The CFO pulled historical infrastructure diagrams from archived ops decks. My name was stamped on nearly every version, from rollout to optimization to automation. Each document told the same story. I had built the backbone, not because they asked, because I knew no one else would. At 2:11 p.m., a logistics supervisor asked aloud who signed off on firing her. No one in the room had an answer that didn't sound like a shrug wrapped in buzzwords. Janice didn't speak publicly. She never did, but someone noticed she canceled Celia's 4 p.m. meeting without explanation. Another error pinged, minor. But this time it involved a shipment of lithium batteries misrouted across state lines. Hazmat protocols. Real risk. Inside the office, they called it a systems check, a calibration issue. But outside, among vendors in Slack whispers between cubicle corners, there was another name for it: collapse. I watched it unfold from my living room, the windows open breeze steady. I didn't interfere. I didn't need to. They were only now learning what I had always known. If you don't understand the system's logic, you shouldn't touch the engine. And somewhere between those error logs, Harold Langford returned. The manila folder was the first thing Harold saw when he returned. No fanfare, no warm welcome. Just his name typed neatly on the tab and a single post-it stuck to the top, Clause 17E, violated. He sat down slower than usual, still recovering, still stitched. But it wasn't the pain in his gut that made his breath catch. It was the weight inside that folder. He peeled it open, and there it was, my signature. And his side-by-side, dated during the week the old West Hub nearly burned to the ground. That week I hadn't asked for hazard pay. I had asked for authority over my own work. He gave it to me because he knew no one else could have pulled the company out of that fire. He'd forgotten, but the ink hadn't. The clause was clear: no structural terminations if my IP remained in use without my written consent. And his daughter had done exactly that. He didn't call Celia, didn't email. He turned to Rhonda, his stone-faced assistant, who didn't ask questions, didn't miss details. "Cancel Celia's 10 a.m., he said. Rhonda nodded once and stepped out, phone already dialing. The board was assembled by 10:45. No one asked why, they knew. My email had already circulated twice. Legal had annotated it. I had confirmed the systems were still running, my original logic rewrapped and rebranded, but mine. He read the clause again, lips pressed so tight, they paled. There was no ambiguity, just precise language and a quiet trapdoor that had been waiting 15 years for someone to forget what was agreed in good faith. By 11 hours, Janice arrived with a legal pad and a pen she only used when signatures mattered. By 11:07, Marta Dway slid a printed spreadsheet across the table showing active protocol usage under my name. And still, Harold didn't defend Celia. He didn't raise his voice. He simply folded his hands, stared at the table, and let silence settle over the room like dust. I hadn't come for vengeance. I'd come for correction. And Celia, bright and smirking in the hallway outside, had no idea what was waiting behind the boardroom door. I arrived just before noon. Not early, not late. Just when it would matter most. Inside the boardroom, the air was oddly still, too quiet for a company that claimed to value innovation. Celia had arrived minutes before, all swagger and polish, blazer, cinched eyes scanning for admiration, but there was none. No smiles, no nods, no congrats murmured under breath, just Janice seated at the head of the table reading aloud. Clause 17E, she said evenly, eyes never leaving the page. No structural or leadership changes, including termination, shall be executed without written consent of Miss Marin Vale. If company operations are utilizing intellectual property authored or designed by her during active employment. She looked up. They were. They still are. Legal confirmed it with a nod. A younger associate handed out binders. 70%. That's how much of the active logistics system still depended on my protocols. Not legacy. Lev. This wasn't just a firing, one board member murmured. It was contractual negligence. Celia opened her mouth, but nothing came. I stepped into the room, then quietly, no announcement. The door shut behind me without a sound. Janice didn't flinch. She simply shifted the binder in front of her. Miss Vale, she said, calm as stone. I took the open seat at the end of the table. My folder rested in front of me, unopened. I didn't need to flip through it. They already had the proof. Celia sat across from me now, back straighter than before, but her fingers fidgeted. Her voice finally surfaced brittle and too bright. I thought we were modernizing. Your systems were never obsolete, I said. You just changed their name. She blinked. I folded my hands and waited. Harold hadn't spoken. Not once. He sat watching me, watching her, his eyes giving away nothing but weight. The kind of weight that came from realizing you'd given the wrong person a match in a room full of kerosene. Then Janice turned to me and said, "We'd like you to show us what she missed." And I slid the flash drive across the table. The flash drive clicked into the port with a small final sound. Nothing dramatic, just confirmation. Janice nodded once. Marta from compliance tapped the keyboard. The screen on the far wall blinked to life. It wasn't a presentation. No slides, no soundtrack. Just a direct feed from the freight dashboard interface still running on production servers. Load balancing shipment, forecasting reroute intelligence, every layer pulsing in real time. Celia tilted her head, trying to find a flaw, some flaw, but the system ran too well. Then it appeared. Bottom right, quiet, steady, powered by M. Vale IP Holdings, watermarked, burned into the lower layer of every logic sequence. Even through the updated UI, through Celia's color palette and branding tweaks, it glowed. My signature lived in the system's bloodstream. No one spoke at first. Then a whisper from legal, "That's clear ownership." Another followed. If they failed to disclose that to vendors, this isn't just breach, it's licensing fraud. I didn't flinch. I didn't smirk. I sat still as murmurs rippled through the room. One board member leaned forward. "Have vendors already seen this watermark?" I answered with a nod. 3 have reached out. 1 asked about license clarity. Harold exhaled slowly. His hands were clasped, but his knuckles had gone white. Celia's eyes were locked on the screen. Her fingers had stopped fidgeting. She didn't speak, couldn't. Janice turned to legal. "Do we have exposure?" Substantial, the reply came. "Back royalties, potential recontracting, class actions if it's seen as deceptive." Celia opened her mouth again, but no sound came out. Her face flushed beneath carefully blended makeup. I didn't look at her. I didn't need to. Because my work had spoken louder than any pitch deck ever could. Because when you build something real, something that runs without apology, its roots outlast the person who tries to bury it. Janice folded her hands. "Miss Vale," she said, "would you be willing to negotiate terms of reinstatement?" I reached into my folder and placed a sealed envelope on the table. Then I said quietly, "You may want to read the offer before you assume I want the same desk." The envelope stayed sealed on the table for a long moment. No one reached for it, not at first. Janice gave Harold a small glance. Permission or warning, I couldn't tell. He opened it carefully, eyes scanning the terms I'd drafted the night before. Reinstatement. Back pay for 6 months. Retroactive equity correction based on the usage of my IP. And a 2-year licensing contract under my name on my terms. Independent oversight. No Langford veto power. He read it twice, then looked up. You could have demanded more. I didn't come to punish anyone, I said, just to make the truth inescapable. Celia hadn't moved. She sat with her hands in her lap, quiet now in a way I suspected she hadn't been in years. Harold's voice was low. "We'd like you back," effective immediately. I didn't let the silence stretch. Carrington Freight made me an offer. Full autonomy, clean structure, no boardroom politics, and no Langfords in the wings. I kept my voice even. It wasn't hard to say yes. The surprise in the room was restrained but real. "You'd walk away from what you built?" Harold asked. I shook my head. "No, I'm bringing it with me. You didn't build it. You just forgot who did." He nodded slowly, absorbing the blow like someone who knew he had no right to ask for less grace than he was getting. "You don't want revenge," he said, more observation than question. "I don't believe in revenge," I answered. "I believe in enforcement." Janice closed the folder in front of her. "We'll finalize the license terms by end of week," she said. I stood, smoothing my blazer with the same hands that once debugged freight code at 3 a.m., in a warehouse with no heat. No one stopped me. No one spoke. As I reached the boardroom door, I paused, not for effect, not for memory, just for truth. "For whoever takes over my systems," I said without turning, "start by changing the passwords." I didn't wait for a response. The room had already answered with its silence. Behind me, chairs creaked. Pens were set down, eyes adjusted to a shift they hadn't prepared for. Celia didn't move. Janice scribbled a note I'd never read. Harold exhaled like someone preparing to carry weight he could no longer hand off. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway. Still no applause. That was fine. Applause fades. Systems don't. Outside, the sun was sharp on the marble floor. I walked past the reception desk, past the plaque that still bore the mission statement I helped draft a decade ago, past the elevator I used to take before sunrise. No one tried to stop me. No one called my name. I didn't need a security escort or a final signature. They already knew I wasn't coming back. At the sidewalk, I paused only long enough to text Carrington's CTO. "Let's proceed. IP terms as discussed. You'll have full access by Friday." The reply came within seconds. Looking forward. My heels clicked down the concrete, steady and deliberate, a rhythm I controlled. I wasn't rushing toward anything. I was stepping into what I'd already earned without permission, without a crown, without the need to be chosen. I'd written the passwords. I'd architected the walls. I'd placed every window exactly where the light now fell. They could change the locks. I had already changed the blueprint. By the time Celia realized what she'd broken couldn't be repainted, the board would have moved on. Reassignment, restructure, formal review. There'd be no scandal, just a slow erasure. Her inbox would fill with unread reports. Her calendar would shrink. No farewell email, just clearance revoked system rights, suspended her name removed from the deployment chain. Somewhere inside the servers, my tag would remain quiet, buried, immutable. That's the thing about building something real. You don't need to shout to be remembered. You just need to leave behind something they can't run without.